Chapter 27 Insomniac Interrogation.
Journal entry number 346. June 3rd, year 1011 on the Grand Celestial Calendar. Dear Twilight Sparkle, it's me. Or rather, it's you. We're the same person at different points in time. I'm writing this journal entry specifically for you in the future, in the event something happens and you've lost some important memories of the past few days. Hopefully it won't come to that, but I may as well take the precaution. If you're wondering why I've decided to open this like I'm writing a letter to myself, don't ask me. This was your idea. In the span of just 3 short days, Ponyville has gone from a quiet little country town to a den for something sinister lurking in the shadows. I haven't managed to grasp the full scope of what's going on yet, but I've discovered that it's all connected to something called Coral Lumini Loony. And whatever this Moonlight Choir actually is, I haven't fully understood it yet. Based on what I've witnessed, I'm under the grim impression that it's some form of cult. The phrase Salutati Coral has cropped up every now and then, either murmured on the breaths of ponies afflicted with some sort of memory-blocking enchantment, or in odd dreams, depicting centuries-old events I should have no knowledge of. I suppose I should touch on that a bit. This all started when I was visited by the Mare in the Moon. She showed up, said some cryptic things I'm fairly certain were just simple attempts to scare me, and left. At first, I had written it off as just a bizarre, bad dream. But the very next day, I encountered a book by the name Coral Lumini Loony. Coincidentally enough, a book that had shown up in that very dream. Coincidence? Unlikely. After that, I learned of the library's 3rd floor and of Mr. Knox's insistence on keeping other people out of there, to the point that he's been using some kind of magic to keep any and all memories of the place at bay, more or less. It isn't perfect, as I was previously shown by Applejack, one of Pinky's friends, tall earth pony, Stetson hat, can't miss her. I also agreed to at least try and do something about it, or at least figure out what it even was. Speaking of, the very next day, I was ushered into the Everfree Forest by a mysterious note, claiming there were answers in the Everfree. And there were, in a manner of speaking. If you consider an arcane shard of stone up in an impossibly tall tree an answer, it didn't tell me anything specific about Nox, but it did prove that whatever Nox is doing is somehow connected to the Mare in the Moon, and by extension, the Great Shadow War and the Equestrian Ciaran War. Though in retrospect, the connection is kind of obvious. Mare in the Moon, Moonlight Choir. If this is a cult, they are not exactly very creative. It's hard to put into words exactly how that happened, though. The stone in the tree reacted to the travel amulet and triggered some kind of dream. I don't remember most of it, only the important details, and the Mare in the Moon mentioned me dream walking to see those details. I still don't know why or how that happened, but I know that someone caused it to happen. Someone wanted me to see those things, but I still don't know why. And then there's Fluttershy. Just today, as of writing this, she finally explained what's been going on with her. Long story short, she's been helping a zebra in the woods fight off the Timberwolves. And yes, I'm aware of how crazy that sounds. Want to read something crazier? You agreed to help. And you did, in exchange for information about Nox, which was also something she knew. But out of respect for her, I won't recount the experience. Just to know that the 2 things you need to look out for around Nox are some kind of amulet or necklace, and some kind of broken black stone. It's not specific, I know, but I don't have the heart to try and press her for more answers. Telling that story was hard for her. So don't make her do it again. Now, Twilight, if you're reading this and don't remember writing any of it, or living through any of it for that matter, that's probably because Nox got to you with whatever form of memory-altering magic he's gotten his hooves on. I don't know what you're supposed to do with that knowledge. Or rather, I don't know what I'd do with this knowledge, but you're a smart pony. I'm sure you'll figure it out. Or I'm a smart pony and I'll figure something out. Not smart enough to know how to properly write a warning to myself, apparently. But if you do remember writing this, then congratulations. You have successfully wasted your time by recapping the past 3 days for absolutely no reason.
All was silent, save for the hum of Twilight's horn. The only light came from the moon high above outside, and the gentle glow of Twilight's magic. She lay all but motionless in her bed, reading over her most recent journal entry for what had to be the 100th time. She didn't have a reason for continuously reading it. She knew better than anyone what she had written down. But she didn't really have anything else she could do for the time being. Sleep had proven elusive tonight, bouts of it becoming shorter and shorter as the night went on. The clock read as 10:30, and Twilight still couldn't sleep for the life of her. She couldn't even tell if it was a curse or a blessing, considering who she might be visited by if she even could get to rest. It might not be worth it, depending on what could be waiting for her behind the veil, so to speak. And that was only one of the things distracting her. Timberwolves, the Mare in the Moon, Nox, Onwood, Rainbow Dash of all people. There were so many questions flying around in her head, each accompanied by any number of hypothetical answers. But not a single one was useful, just a bunch of incomprehensible noise that kept her from getting some sleep. And that was just covering the things that she'd chosen to write on for that journal entry. The unexpected reunion with Rainbow Dash and her emotional moment with Spike had been excluded from the summary. She didn't even know how to feel about the Pegasus showing back up in her life, especially with all of the information that she had. The moment with Spike, meanwhile, was just too gracious for her to properly convey with written words. She doubted Nox's memory magic could touch that anyway, not without direct intent, at least, so she didn't see the point of making herself relive that. It wasn't like she was going to forget on her own. Speaking of that event from earlier, she gently sighed and continued her only other motion, mildly scratching the base of Spike's head as he slept beside her. After what had happened earlier, she had seen fit to give him the offer of sleeping with her in her bed tonight. Just a small gesture to try and ease both of their anxious minds. The rest of the day after that event had been a huge upswing, by comparison, but still, the small gesture of kindness seemed appropriate, and Spike hadn't said no, for whatever that meant. But even still, Twilight couldn't find the ability to drift off into dreams. She couldn't calm the calamity in her cranium long enough to actually get some decent sleep. She groaned in frustration, placing the journal on the nightstand and cautiously getting up, trying not to wake Spike as she did, and silently made her way to the window. Another flicker from her horn pushed the curtains aside, enough to let her peer outside into the darkness beyond the glass. Ponyville was at peace, and all was quiet, save for Twilight's neighbor across the way. Lyra was busy arguing with that peculiar yellow earth pony that seemed to live with her. It wasn't a loud argument, and the others in the neighborhood didn't seem to be bothered, and it wasn't any of Twilight's business either way. Her eyes didn't linger on the duo outside, and soon she was focused on the gleaming moon high above them. The hollow eyes of the Mare in the Moon stared back with their calm silver radiance. Of all the unusual secrets Twilight had stumbled on within the past few days, her unique interactions with the ages-old alicorn had been the most unusual. All of this started when that mysterious hooded figure had invaded her dreams, bringing with her a vision of that book that had piqued Twilight's interest in Nox. A book that appeared in their next meeting as well, that led her into the Everfree Forest to see whatever it was that dream had been. Even now, it didn't make any sense. Being forced to relive that mare's memories, even if only in part. What was the end game here? What possible reason could anyone have for showing that to Twilight?
And I think I know where I might find some answers.
Twilight grimaced and lightly rested her head on the cool glass pane before her. She closed her eyes and envisioned one of the discarded documents that Rainbow had all but thrown at her, trying to recall any detail she could. But the only things she'd been able to commit to memory were those 3 accursed words that tied all of this together. She had been too shocked at the time to do anything other than gawk at the document, something she regretted now.
I should have taken the file when I had the chance.
The idea of Rainbow Dash having information that could possibly help her was a tantalizing thought. Twilight was certain she could overpower Nox if need be. There wasn't any immediate danger in play. She was an alicorn after all. But that Pegasus could help her go in with a greater understanding of the situation. Something that Twilight desired very much. It would be so easy to just storm in right now. But the more she entertained that idea, the more she didn't like it. The last time she had walked headlong into a situation without any forethought or plan, she nearly fell to her death from atop that massive tree. The time before that, she had almost gotten Spike mauled by timberwolves. And the time before that, the two of them had almost become another dragon's late lunch. She didn't have a good track record for improvising. She was suddenly distracted from her thoughts as the old mattress shifted and creaked, accented by the low, grumbling yawn of Spike. Something had roused him from his slumber, prompting him to rise and stretch. It was probably Twilight's talking to herself, or maybe it was the sudden absence of the scratching she had been giving him. Either way, he was up now.
Twilight? That you?
He began rubbing his weary eyes with his claws, trying to get his eyes to adjust to the relatively bright light of her horn.
What time is it? Is something up? Just having a hard time staying asleep.
Twilight dimmed the light of her horn.
You should go back to bed. You need your sleep.
So something is up. You always have trouble sleeping when you think too much.
Well, yeah, he had her there. Twilight wasn't the only one in the world incapable of sleep when there was too much on her mind, but it was definitely a trait that she had expressed in the past. She sighed in defeat, unable to hide the obvious distress from him. She shook her head at her own vain attempt at doing so, stepping back towards the bed and sitting down next to Spike. Then she unceremoniously flopped down onto her back with a resounding, upset groan.
Rainbow Dash knows what's going on.
It was far from the only thing bugging Twilight at the moment, but that was the one she felt the need to actually tell Spike about.
She's somehow involved in this mess. For better or for worse.
In the dim light of her horn, Twilight could hardly see the confused grimace that Spike donned.
How?
Remember all those papers she flew around? I caught a glimpse of something irrelevant, to say the least.
So why didn't you bring it up?
Because reasons.
Twilight wasn't sure how to describe the torrent of conflicted feelings that had been springing up from the impromptu reunion with Rainbow, choosing instead to grumble out an intentionally vague answer to try and avoid the headache that came with it.
Okay.
Spike allowed the conversation to come to a momentary halt, scratching at his chin as he thought over the reply that he'd been given.
So, why don't you just go and ask her about it?
I'm honestly considering it. There's just one problem.
Twilight took in a deep breath for what she had to say next. It was going to have consequences no matter what. There was no avoiding it. So she figured it would be best to just tear the bandage off quickly.
Either I leave you here alone and risk something happening, or I take you with me, and I risk something happening.
That's kind of a dumb problem.
Spike bluntly retorted.
You take me everywhere. Well, almost everywhere, but still.
Spike couldn't have been more wrong. While it was true that Twilight had left Spike alone a number of times over the course of their travels, she'd never done so without previously informing him, only doing so when in the relative safety of a town or roadside inn, and making sure not to go too far so that anything could happen to him. Last night's little adventure into the Everfree had been different. She didn't tell him about it at all, outside of an almost cryptically vague note, and she'd gone a considerable distance from his admittedly secure location. Her only precaution for his protection was a simple array of spells and enchantments that, effectively, acted as one of the world's most elaborate baby monitors. Great for letting her know if Spike had woken up or if somebody else had gotten into the house, but not so useful for helping Twilight get back. Granted, her carelessness in that scenario had come from a sudden bout of spontaneousness and curiosity, but that was exactly the thing that Twilight needed to start avoiding, for her sake and his.
I suppose I do.
Twilight couldn't bring herself to talk to him about last night. It had been a huge mistake on her part, and she'd already let him down enough today. She didn't need to add to the emotional turmoil he had.
But I just don't know about this one. I don't know how quickly things could spiral out of control. It could be nothing, or it could be the most dangerous thing I've ever done. I have no idea what I'm walking into.
Well, you've done a good job at keeping me safe so far.
Spike shuffled closer and placed his head on Twilight's chest, effectively turning her into a makeshift pillow in a sign of affection.
We got away from that dragon. And those dogs. Kind of, anyway.
The words tore at Twilight's heart, in both good and bad ways. The fact that Spike still had that faith in her was a comforting thought, even if it did come with the unpleasant reminder of two complete failures in her eyes. She wouldn't call being almost eaten by a dragon safe in any regard, not to mention the literal wound that Spike had suffered as a direct result of her carelessness and haste.
But I don't need to keep putting you in danger like that.
Twilight placed a hoof on Spike's head and gently rubbed into his scales, eliciting a dopey grin from him.
I don't know what I would do if you got hurt. Or worse.
I could always...
Spike interrupted himself with a loud yawn, enraptured by the scratches.
I'll just stay here, you know? Hold down the fort.
He was obviously wanting to go back to sleep, his sagging eyelids being only one of the signs of that.
It's not like anybody's gonna break in.
Twilight hesitated at his offer, continuing to scratch at his head as she mulled it over. It couldn't hurt to leave a slumbering dragon unattended for a short while. It wouldn't be the first time. But even still, Twilight wasn't sure if she should even attempt something like that. There was no telling what would happen when she went to go confront Rainbow Dash. The debate in her head roared on for what felt like hours before she made her decision. In spite of everything, Spike was making it clear that he'd rather go back to sleep. And Twilight didn't feel right denying him that, especially if he was the only one out of the two of them who could actually get some. Even though there was a part of her deep down that knew it could lead to problems, she couldn't bring herself to drag Spike into a potentially dangerous situation. Not again. She just couldn't do it. And so the decision was made, and Twilight began to prepare for her little visit with Rainbow. She helped Spike get back to sleep. The only difference was that Spike was fully aware of her nighttime departure, and personally hoping that he'd get to just sleep through the whole thing. Twilight made sure he was fast asleep before going on her way, though not without fortifying her home with enough charms and wards to repel a small army for several hours. She made sure that absolutely no living thing outside of her was going to be able to get into that house without putting up the fight of their lives. Checking and double-checking her enchantments, twice, to make sure she had taken care of everything, she walked out the front door and locked it behind her. As she made her way out, Twilight was presented with yet another problem. She didn't know where Rainbow Dash was. It wasn't like she had bothered to ask the Pegasus her address in Ponyville. She would likely be staying in her family home, but again, Twilight didn't know where that was. And it wasn't like she had all night to go door to door trying to find it. But Lady Luck seemed to be on Twilight's side this evening, as it wasn't long until she was fortunate enough to catch sight of the very mare she had ventured out to find as she rounded the corner. She didn't know what Rainbow was doing out at such a late hour, but she was very clearly trying to be stealthy. Dash was walking slowly, turning her head this way and that every now and again to survey the streets, making sure that she wasn't being watched or followed. It was a wholly involuntary reaction that kept Twilight from being discovered, ducking back behind the building just in time to keep her presence hidden.
That's a bit too convenient,
Twilight thought with held breath, waiting to be discovered. But the moment Dash came around and saw her never came, and Twilight released a silent sigh.
What in the world is she up to?
She peeked her head back around the building, watching with great interest as the Pegasus continued her task, whatever it was. It was clear that she was up to something, and Twilight was quick to change her objective to figuring out what that was without being caught. But as she sleuthed through the suburbs in silent pursuit of her old flying instructor, there was a small piece of her that knew that this was a bad idea. Rainbow Dash was a Black Hoof now, after all, and interfering with an officially sanctioned Black Hoof investigation was one of the most severe crimes in Equestria. Twilight knew that. But at the same time, she just couldn't help herself. She had long since dedicated herself to seeing this whole mess through, and Rainbow Dash, of all people, was not going to be the one to make her stop. In what was a rare display of tact from the Pegasus, from Twilight's perspective, Rainbow was moving with subtlety and care, as opposed to what she was more widely expected of. A lot can change in 5 years, and it seemed that Rainbow had undergone her fair share of change in that time. With how perceptive and cautious she was acting, Twilight wasn't sure how long she'd be able to keep herself hidden. Her sole focus was on not losing track of the Technicolor Pegasus and keeping herself out of sight, using whatever means she could to remain undetected. But in the end, it proved to be a fruitless endeavor. Wherever she was going, Rainbow was not taking a direct route, curving around every building and turning at every available intersection. And as time went on, her pattern became more erratic, and she started moving faster. Twilight couldn't keep up, and soon she was left wondering which way Rainbow had even gone. She had botched at her chance for answers, and was now left alone in the dimly lit streets of Ponyville, with no one other than the Mare and the Moon to keep her company.
Lost her.
Twilight groaned to herself.
How in the world did she do that?
Trained professional.
The calm yet aggravated answer from directly behind Twilight startled her, causing her to spin around with a flinch, and she came face to face with a stone-faced Rainbow Dash.
Did you honestly think I didn't notice you trailing me for 20 minutes?
I was really hoping you hadn't.
cute.
A cocky smirk decorated Rainbow's expression for a moment, before she returned to her cold glare.
So is there a reason you're following me around?
I needed to talk to you.
Can it wait until tomorrow? I'm busy with something really important right now.
Twilight didn't give an immediate response, trying to put the right words to her thought process. Inspiration struck as she caught a glimpse of the silver orb hanging lazily in the sky, an almost teasing reminder of the mess that she had gotten herself mixed up in. She turned back to Dash with a quizzical look, choosing to answer that question with one of her own.
More important than the choir?
Choir?
One could almost hear glass breaking as Dash's eye twitched for a brief moment. She stood there blankly staring at Twilight as if trying to process the question herself. Her ears flicked up to attention like a light bulb going off in her head, as if to indicate that the idea just came to light.
I think Rarity does some pony tones thing with some of her friends. If you're talking about that, I wouldn't know.
Coral Lumini Loony.
Twilight stopped the Pegasus right there and pointed to one of the mare's saddlebags.
That's what they call themselves, right? The Choir of Moonlight?
If Twilight's first question could shatter glass, then that statement alone could have been enough to bring ruin to the whole of Equestria. And once more, Rainbow just stood there with the same wide-eyed, blank look on her face. Twilight could tell that there were a million questions going through her mind, just as they had been surging through Twilight's head for the past several days. But unlike Twilight, these questions seemed to manifest a great deal of rage in Rainbow, her blank expression shifting closer and closer towards anger. Her eyebrows furrowed, her teeth bearing down on her lower lip, and her body starting to shake just slightly. She was pissed, in every sense of the word. And that sentiment was made clear as she grabbed Twilight by the collar of her cloak and dragged her forcefully off of the street and behind the nearest building before releasing her.
Who told you?
There was righteous fury held in those words, a burning rage that couldn't possibly be quenched even by the deepest devotions.
How much do you know? Who else knows?
I can ask you the same.
No! This is not asking questions time.
Rainbow hissed back in defiance.
This is you answer my questions time. Who else knows?
Why is that?
Because anyone who's heard those 3 words is in life-threatening danger.
Rainbow Dash's anger began to mellow out, transitioning to panicked anxiety more than anything else.
So if anyone, absolutely anyone else knows about this, you need to tell me right now, or very bad things will happen to them.
At first, Twilight took that statement as a threat. Whether that threat was directed at her or at Spike was something that she didn't know, but she wasn't going to waste time trying to figure that part out, and prepared herself for Dash to throw the first punch. But that first punch never came, and Twilight was left glaring back at the enraged Pegasus in silence for a prolonged period of time. Prolonged enough for her to notice the more subtle nuances of Rainbow's scowl. Anger was dominant in her expression and tone, but there was something else lurking behind the surface. Dash's lower lip was held firmly in her teeth in an attempt to hide how much it was twitching and quivering. Her eyes, while glaring daggers into Twilight's own, held something else. A deep sense of unease and worry. Anxiety that Twilight almost instantly recognized. It was akin to the feelings that ravaged her mind when she got separated from Spike, or how she felt when she had thought she had inadvertently abandoned or lost him when being pursued by the dragon. This wasn't just anger. This was fear. The kind that one goes through when someone they care about is in danger. Rainbow's question wasn't professional, at least not entirely, but it was one born of worry for those she cared about. Ponyville was her home. These were the people she grew up with, who raised her. And in one moment, Twilight had caused Rainbow Dash to jump to the conclusion that those people were in danger. A horrible, dark feeling that Twilight could empathize with. It was that empathy that led her to answer what she assumed to be the most important of Dash's questions. Explaining how she had gotten mixed into this situation. Everything from how Applejack showed her the memory alteration that a good chunk of the townsfolk had been subjected to, all the way up to how Fluttershy had seen one such alteration take place. There weren't many details that she chose to omit, but there were a few that she decided to keep to herself. Both out of a desire to not lay down all of her cards at once, but also because she just couldn't find the words to describe them. Her encounters with the Mare and the Moon were among those admitted tidbits for the moment. That included the night where Twilight had been made witness to events within the very Mare's past, something that she still didn't fully figure out. But aside from that, she found herself willing to brief Rainbow Dash on everything else. Rainbow became visibly calmer as the explanation went on, only stopping Twilight every now and again to make sure there were no prying ears listening in on this sensitive conversation. There were no requests for clarification, and no interrupting inquiries. Only a stern silence was given back as Twilight spoke. It was only after Twilight was finished that the Pegasus made herself heard.
So, AJ and Flutters know that there's something up, but they don't know about the choir itself?
Rainbow placed great emphasis on this question, looking to Twilight with eyes that were practically begging for an answer.
That's a little specific.
Confusion made itself known in Twilight's tone as she donned this more quizzical look, asking herself why Rainbow wanted clarification on that of all things.
But I'm fairly certain that's the case, yes.
That confusion only grew as Rainbow relaxed at the answer she was given, with a noticeable loss of tension in her face and posture.
Good. She's safe.
Dash muttered under her breath, just quietly enough for Twilight to notice. There were a few moments of reprieve in the conversation as she processed the information. Then, just as Twilight was about to ask a follow-up question, Dash interrupted her sternly.
Okay, thanks for the intel. Now do yourself a favor and forget about all of this, magically if you have to. Trust me, it's for your own good. You don't want that name in your head.
That was all she said before she began walking away, much to Twilight's chagrin.
I'm not walking away from this.
Twilight sternly spoke up, an action that prompted Rainbow to look back at her.
I'm in too deep to just turn tail and run away. I'm going to see this through to the end.
No, you're not. You have absolutely no idea what you're getting yourself mixed up in.
The authority befitting Dash's title radiated from her tone, a sign that this was now entirely a professional conversation.
I don't know what you think the choir is, but whatever it is, you're wrong. This is big, Twilight. Bigger than you can possibly know.
I know more than you think.
Twilight's smile showed great confidence.
No, you really don't.
Rainbow's interruption was blunt and intense. The calm from earlier was gone now, and once more she was displaying mostly anger.
And trust me, not knowing is the best thing that's ever happened to you.
And why is that?
I can't tell you.
Why not?
Because knowing makes it stronger.
Frustration was able to shine through her fear as Dash barked back at the alicorn, desperate to get Twilight to change her mind.
The more people who know, the stronger it gets. Just knowing its name is dangerous enough. So do yourself and everyone else a favor. Forget. Whatever way you can, as fast as you can, forget this. This hole runs deep, Twilight, and you don't want to chase the white rabbit.
Rainbow turned to walk away, taking with her Twilight's only avenue of further information. Twilight didn't have any other options left, and she quickly decided to break out her trump card.
Deeper than the Great Shadow War?
Rainbow didn't respond, verbally or visually. Not at first. She stopped and stood there for a short while, as if processing the question. Then, she slowly turned back to glare at Twilight.
Explain.
I've been having dreams. Dreams about the Mare and the Moon.
Twilight continued, closing the distance with slow and confident steps, only stopping when she was standing between Rainbow Dash and wherever it was she was going.
And I've learned things in those dreams. Things I probably shouldn't know. Like how long this choir of yours has really been around. I don't think walking away from this is an option for me anymore. I'm part of this, one way or another.
Dash's eyes grew wider, shocked and almost appalled. If there were words to be said, Dash didn't say them right now. She almost looked like she was about to puke based on her expression. Obviously, she didn't like what Twilight was saying, but she couldn't find the words to express that. It gave Twilight ample time to finish the offer she had in mind.
So let me help put a stop to it. You can't tell me that an alicorn wouldn't be helpful.
Again, there was no answer at first. Either Dash didn't have one to give, or she was just too shocked to give it. She just stood there, blankly staring at Twilight with a look of utter disbelief, almost identical to the one Twilight had given earlier when Dash had explained how she had become a Black Hoof. Neither one of them kept track of how long this went, before Dash finally gave her answer.
If you really want to get involved, then you're the only one who can be blamed for whatever happens to you.
Twilight was willing to accept those consequences, if only to get her hooves on the information that the Pegasus had to offer. But when she asked for clarification on the subject, she was given a simple command.
Just follow me, and be quiet.
Dash still had a job that needed to be done, and it seemed that Twilight was now along for the ride.